The conference room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Chicago traffic filtering through the 32nd floor windows. I could feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes on me as David Morrison's words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. "Look, I appreciate Rachel's passion for this project," he said, his voice carrying that condescending tone I'd grown to recognize over the past 2 years working under his management. "But let's be realistic here. She's too emotional to lead something of this magnitude. The Hartwell acquisition requires steady hands, not someone who gets worked up over every little detail." I felt the familiar heat rising in my cheeks, not from emotion, as David would surely interpret it, but from pure, calculated anger. Around the mahogany conference table, my colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Some stared at their laptops, others found sudden interest in their coffee cups. Nobody met my eyes. "I think what David means," interjected Patricia Williams, our VP of Strategic Development, her voice carefully measured, "is that this acquisition requires a very methodical approach. We need to consider all perspectives before moving forward." But David wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, the kind of expensive ergonomic piece that came with his senior director title, and folded his arms across his chest. "Rachel gets passionate about her ideas, which isn't necessarily bad, but passion can cloud judgment. The Hartwell deal is worth $42 million. We can't afford emotional decision-making." Emotional. The word echoed in my mind as I maintained my professional composure. This from the man who'd thrown a coffee mug across his office last month when the quarterly numbers came in lower than expected. The same man who'd shouted at his assistant so loudly that half the floor heard him berating her for scheduling conflicts that weren't even her fault. "I understand your concerns, David," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the project leadership structure in more detail." I gathered my presentation materials, 3 weeks of meticulous research, financial modeling, and strategic analysis that I'd prepared for this moment. The Hartwell acquisition had been my idea from the beginning. I'd identified the target company, analyzed their market position, and developed the preliminary approach strategy. But apparently, having strong convictions about my own work made me too emotional to see it through. After the meeting, I walked back to my office, a modest space with a view of the building's courtyard rather than the city skyline that came with senior management positions. I closed the door and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to feel the frustration and humiliation of what had just happened. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work. That evening, I stayed late reviewing the Hartwell files. The building was quiet except for the cleaning crew and the occasional footsteps of other workaholics like myself. My desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over spreadsheets and market analyses, numbers that told a story of opportunity that David either couldn't see or chose to ignore. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Jenny. "How did the presentation go? Are you leading the big acquisition project?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Still in discussion. I'll call you tomorrow." The next few weeks fell into a familiar pattern. David took credit for the Hartwell opportunity in his reports to upper management, while assigning me to handle the supporting research and detailed analysis. I attended meetings where he presented my strategies as his own insights, watched him field questions about work I'd done, and listened to him explain nuances of the target company that I discovered through my own investigation. But I didn't complain. Instead, I documented everything. Every email, every meeting summary, every strategic recommendation I developed. I kept meticulous records of my contributions, my analysis, and my recommendations. Not out of spite, but because I'd learned that in corporate environments, your work only matters if you can prove you did it. 3 months into the Hartwell project, David announced that he'd be taking a sabbatical. His wife had been offered a fellowship at Oxford, and they decided to spend a semester in England while she pursued her research. He'd be gone for 4 months, returning just in time for the final stages of the acquisition process. Rachel will be handling project coordination in my absence, he announced during our team meeting, the words delivered with the casual indifference of someone delegating housekeeping duties. She's familiar with all the research and can keep things moving until I return. Project coordination, not project leadership, not strategic oversight. Coordination, the kind of role typically assigned to skilled administrative support rather than strategic managers. Patricia Williams caught me after the meeting. Rachel, I know David positioned this as coordination, but realistically, you'll be running point on Hartwell while he's gone. Do you feel prepared for that level of responsibility? I looked at Patricia, a woman who'd climbed to VP level in a male-dominated industry through what I suspected had been years of similar challenges. Her question felt less like doubt and more like an opportunity. Absolutely. I've been involved in every aspect of the project development. I'm confident I can maintain momentum and continue moving toward our acquisition timeline. Good. Keep me updated on your progress. And Rachel? She paused at the conference room door. Don't let anyone minimize your capabilities. The Hartwell opportunity wouldn't exist without your initial analysis. David's departure felt like stepping out of a shadow I hadn't realized was there. Suddenly, I was fielding calls directly from Hartwell's executive team. I was presenting strategy updates to our board of directors. I was making decisions that would impact a $42 million transaction. And something interesting happened. The project accelerated. Without David's tendency to second-guess every recommendation, to demand additional analysis for decisions that were already well supported by data, we moved through milestones faster than originally projected. The Hartwell executives responded positively to direct communication rather than filtered messages through multiple management layers. Rachel, this is impressive work, said James Chen, our chief financial officer, during a progress review meeting 6 weeks into David's absence. The due diligence timeline is ahead of schedule, and the financial modeling is some of the most thorough I've seen. How are you managing to maintain this pace? I thought carefully about my response. I think there's value in streamlined decision-making. When you're close to the research and analysis, you can move more quickly from insight to action. What I didn't say was that David's management style had been like driving with the parking brake engaged, technically moving forward, but with unnecessary resistance and slower progress than the project's natural momentum would have allowed. The Hartwell executives began requesting me specifically for calls and meetings. We'd like to continue working with Rachel, their CEO mentioned to Patricia during a conference call. She understands our business model and our concerns. The communication has been excellent. By the 8th week of David's absence, I was no longer just coordinating the project, I was leading it in every meaningful sense. I was developing negotiation strategies, managing relationship dynamics between our companies, and making strategic recommendations that were being implemented without additional oversight. Patricia began including me in executive-level discussions. That would have been well above my official pay grade under normal circumstances. Rachel's insights have been invaluable, she told the leadership team during one meeting. Her understanding of the Hartwell opportunity is comprehensive, and her strategic recommendations have consistently proven sound. But the real validation came from results. 3 months into David's sabbatical, we'd not only maintained the original project timeline, we'd improved it. The acquisition framework was more solid, the financial terms were more favorable, and both companies were more confident about the partnership potential. This is exceptional work, Rachel, Patricia said during our monthly review. I'm curious, how do you think this project might have evolved differently under different management approaches? It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. Patricia was asking me to evaluate David's management style without directly criticizing him. I think different leadership styles can produce different outcomes, I said carefully. Some approaches prioritize consensus building and extensive review processes. Others focus more on leveraging existing expertise and maintaining decision-making momentum. Both have their place, depending on the project requirements and timeline constraints. Patricia nodded, making notes on her legal pad. The board has been very impressed with the Hartwell progress. They're particularly pleased with the client relationship management and the accelerated timeline. These are exactly the kind of results that get noticed at the executive level. As David's return date approached, I found myself in an interesting position. The Hartwell acquisition was not only on track, it was ahead of schedule and performing better than anyone had projected. The target company's executives had specifically requested to continue working with me. Our own leadership team had seen what the project could accomplish under different management, but David remained the senior director. When he returned, he would presumably resume control of the project he'd initiated, even though my leadership had demonstrably improved its outcomes. 2 weeks before David's scheduled return, Patricia requested a meeting in her office. I arrived to find not just Patricia, but also James Chen and Michael Rodriguez, our senior VP of operations. This was either very good news or very bad news. "Rachel, please sit down," Patricia began, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We wanted to discuss the Hartwell project and some upcoming organizational changes." My stomach tightened. Organizational changes usually meant restructuring, which often meant someone was losing their job or being reassigned to less desirable responsibilities. "Over the past 3 months, we've watched you successfully lead a complex acquisition project," Michael said, his tone serious but not ominous. "The results have been impressive, not just in terms of timeline and financial outcomes, but also in client relationship management and strategic execution." James leaned forward in his chair. "The board has taken notice of the Hartwell project's success. They're interested in understanding what factors contributed to the improved performance during this period." I chose my words carefully. "I think it comes down to having clear ownership of decision-making processes and maintaining direct communication with all stakeholders. When information doesn't have to filter through multiple management layers, responses can be faster and more targeted." The 3 executives exchanged glances. Patricia opened a folder on her desk and removed what looked like an official document. "We're creating a new position, Director of Strategic Acquisitions. This role would focus specifically on identifying, developing, and leading major acquisition opportunities. The salary would be commensurate with director-level responsibilities, and the position would report directly to the VP level, director level." My heart began hammering against my ribs, but I tried to keep my expression professionally neutral. "The board has asked us to offer this position to you, Rachel. Your work on Hartwell has demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and execution capability we need for this role." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't just recognition, this was promotion to the same level as David, with authority over the kind of projects I'd been passionate about from the beginning. "I'm honored by your confidence," I managed. "Yes, I'm absolutely interested in this opportunity." "Excellent," Michael said, smiling for the first time since I'd entered the room. "We'll have HR prepare the formal offer letter. Your first major project in this new role will be completing the Hartwell acquisition, something you're obviously well prepared to handle." Patricia handed me the folder. "There's one more thing, Rachel. When David returns next week, he'll be transitioning to a new role as well. We're moving him to regional sales coordination, still an important position, but more focused on his strengths in relationship management rather than strategic project leadership." As I walked back to my office, soon to be my former office. As director-level positions came with better real estate, I thought about the conference room meeting from months ago. David's words echoed in my memory. "She's too emotional to lead something of this magnitude." I hadn't argued with him then. I hadn't defended myself or pointed out the irony of his criticism. Instead, I'd simply proven him wrong through consistent professional excellence. The results spoke louder than any rebuttal could have. David returned the following Monday to find the office dynamics had shifted significantly in his absence. I was no longer the passionate but allegedly emotional subordinate who needed his oversight. I was now Director of Strategic Acquisitions, with an office 2 doors down from his new space in the regional sales area. Our first meeting was awkward but professionally cordial. "Congratulations on your promotion, Rachel," he said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I understand you'll be completing the Hartwell acquisition." "Thank you, David. I appreciate the foundation you laid for the project. I'm confident we can bring it to a successful conclusion." It was a diplomatic response that acknowledged his initial contribution without dwelling on the management transition. David nodded, but I could see him processing the implications of our reversed positions. "If you need any background information or context about the early stages of the project, I'm happy to provide it," he offered. "That's generous of you. I think I have pretty comprehensive documentation of the project development, but I'll let you know if anything comes up." We both knew I'd been intimately involved in every aspect of Hartwell from the beginning. We both knew his offer was more about maintaining dignity than providing necessary information, but we maintained the professional courtesy that kept workplace transitions smooth. 6 weeks later, I stood in the same conference room where David had declared me too emotional to lead, presenting the final Hartwell acquisition results to our board of directors. The deal had closed ahead of schedule, under budget, and with terms more favorable than originally projected. "Outstanding work, Rachel," said our CEO as the presentation concluded. "This acquisition represents exactly the kind of strategic growth opportunity we want to pursue more aggressively. The execution has been flawless." Patricia smiled from across the table. "Rachel's leadership on this project has been exemplary. She's demonstrated the strategic thinking and execution capability we need as we expand our acquisition portfolio." As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, sharing congratulations and discussing future opportunities, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 4 months ago, I'd been dismissed as too emotional for strategic leadership. Today, I was being recognized for exactly the kind of steady, analytical approach that major acquisitions required. The irony wasn't lost on me. David's criticism had been based on my passion for the work, the same passion that drove me to do thorough research, comprehensive analysis, and strategic thinking that ultimately made the project successful. What he'd interpreted as emotional liability had actually been professional dedication. Later that week, I received an email from David requesting a brief meeting. We met in my new office, larger than his, with windows facing the city skyline rather than the interior courtyard. "I wanted to congratulate you again on the Hartwell success," he began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The results were impressive." "Thank you, David. I appreciate that." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I've been thinking about that team meeting back in March when we were discussing project leadership for Hartwell." I waited, curious where this conversation was heading. "I think I may have misjudged the situation," he continued, his voice more thoughtful than I'd ever heard it. "What I interpreted as emotional involvement was actually strategic commitment. You cared about getting the details right because you understood the stakes, not because you couldn't handle the pressure." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and I appreciated the acknowledgement. "Different people have different leadership styles," I said diplomatically. "What matters is matching the approach to the project requirements and the team dynamics." David nodded. "You handled the transition very professionally, Rachel, and the results speak for themselves. I'm glad the company recognized your capabilities." After he left, I sat in my office looking out at the city below. The Hartwell acquisition was complete, but it had been more than just a business transaction. It had been a demonstration that competence and results matter more than initial perceptions or management politics. I thought about all the times I'd been labeled too emotional or too passionate about my work, as if caring about quality and details was somehow a professional weakness. In reality, That passion had driven me to do better research, more thorough analysis, and more comprehensive strategic thinking than would have been possible with detached indifference. 6 months later, as I prepared for my next major acquisition project, I realized that David had actually done me a favor. His dismissive comment had motivated me to prove my capabilities through performance rather than arguments. When the opportunity arose to demonstrate leadership, I'd been ready not just with technical skills, but with the confidence that comes from knowing your work can withstand scrutiny. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't defending yourself in the moment. Sometimes it's quietly preparing for the opportunity to show what you're actually capable of achieving. And sometimes, the people who doubt your abilities end up creating the circumstances that allow you to exceed their expectations entirely. The view from my director-level office was pretty good, but the view from proven competence was even better.